You hear the lance before you see it, iron tip striking iron helm. A page boy has dropped it. The metallic sound is small. The august forest absorbs sound like wet wool, but the man on the white horse hears it. He is 23 years old. He has been riding 3 days through the heat. The brain inside the helmet is no longer the brain that began the journey. He turns, he draws. You are 6 feet behind him. You see his face for the second your horse rears. There is no recognition in it, not for the page, not for you, not for the 4 men who will be dead before the others can pull him down. The brain inside that helmet will build the Tudor dynasty, not by ruling, by breaking and passing the break, through a daughter into a son who will not stand up from supper 61 years from now. The man on the horse is Charles VI of France. The forest is near Le Mans. The date is August 1392. The chronicler Michel Pintoin, a monk of Saint-Denis, will write that the king attacked his own knights as though they were traitors. What follows is what the statutes of the realm forgot to print, what Westminster Abbey carved wrong on her slab, and what Shakespeare left out: the documented life of a queen whose only surviving voice is on a will dictated 3 days before she died. 4 men are dead. The king is restrained and carried back to Paris in a litter. 9 years later, in a Parisian palace called the Hôtel Saint-Paul, this man's wife will give birth to their youngest daughter. She will live to be Queen of England. She will become the biological grandmother of the Tudor dynasty. Her body will sit above ground in Westminster Abbey for 275 years. Nothing in any of it will be her decision. The version of her you probably know is the one Shakespeare wrote. Henry V, Act 5, Scene 2. The English king victorious, the French princess charming. He cannot speak French, she cannot speak English. They flirt their way to a treaty. The play ends in a wedding kiss. That scene is set in spring 1420. Her father had been mad for 28 years. Pope Pius II recorded that the king believed his body was made of glass abattoirs and had iron rods sewn into his clothing so he would not shatter. The Princess Henry was negotiating to marry was the daughter of a man wearing iron rods inside his shirt to keep from breaking. Shakespeare leaves that part out. Her name was Catherine de Valois, born 27th of October 1401, married 2nd of June 1420, a treaty more than a wedding, crowned at Westminster Abbey 8 months later, widowed at 20, mother of a king of 2 countries, before the king could walk. Subscribe, and the next forgotten statute we find, we will read out loud. In the next 18 minutes, how a glass king's daughter became the biological vehicle for his madness. How a Welsh servant ended up in the bed of a queen forbidden to marry. And how her body, kept above ground for nearly 3 centuries, was kissed by a stranger on his birthday in 1669. None of it was her plan. The plan was made by other people. She was the document everyone signed. The plan was the Treaty of Troy, 21st of May, 1420, the cathedral at Troy. Henry V signs the document that disinherits his future wife's brother and makes himself heir to the throne of France. The Dauphin had been disinherited under suspicion of murder. Henry, fresh from Agincourt, was the strongest man in the room. The treaty handed him France in stages. Marry, become regent, inherit on the king's death, produce a child. The child rules both crowns. That child was the entire point. The marriage was infrastructure. Catherine and Henry married 12 days later. She was 18. He was 33. The honeymoon was a series of military sieges. By autumn she was pregnant. She crossed to England in February 1421 and was crowned alone at Westminster Abbey. By custom, the only ceremony in her life, arranged so the moment belonged to her. 4 months after the coronation, Henry left for France. He never met his son. The boy was born 6th of December 1421 at Windsor. the only place Henry had specifically warned her not to give birth. She did anyway. 20 months later, Henry V died of dysentery at Vincennes. He had ruled 9 years. He had been married to Catherine for 26 months. She was 20 years old. The baby in the cradle was 9 months old and King of England. 2 months later, her father died in Paris. The baby was now also King of France. She had been delivered to England as part of a treaty. She was now neither wife nor regent. She was the clause that still bound the two crowns. The English court did not know what to do with her, so it did the safest thing. It kept her near her son. The logic from the council records was simple. A widowed queen mother of an infant king is a specific kind of weapon. Remarry her to an English noble, that family becomes royal in the next generation. Remarry her to a Frenchman, the war reopens. Send her home, the boy loses his French claim. The cleanest outcome was that she would not remarry at all. But she was 21. By 1425, the watch had a name to attach. His name was Edmund Beaufort, nephew of the Bishop of Winchester. Unmarried, politically inconvenient, a Beaufort marriage to a Valois queen would have made the next generation of Beauforts royal in 2 countries. The Beauforts were lobbying the Commons for permission. Bedford and Gloucester said no. What Parliament wrote next has no precedent in English law and no successor. The Parliament of 1427 to 28 passed a statute. 6 Henry VI, Chapter 7. A widowed queen could not remarry without the consent of the king. The consent had to be given by the king in person. The king had to be of legal majority. Henry VI, the consenting king, was 6 years old. The statute did not forbid her remarriage. It made remarriage administratively impossible. A closed door whose only key holder was too young to turn it. The penalty for marrying her without consent. The husband's lands and possessions forfeit to the crown. It was the medieval equivalent of seizing a man's assets while keeping the contract intact. The marriage itself, oddly, would still be valid, the children legitimate. The architecture was specifically designed to ruin the husband without erasing the dynastic effect of the union. A queen mother could not be hidden. Her children would always count. And the statute itself is missing. It does not appear in the official statutes of the realm. The cleanest evidence still survives in a single 1430 manuscript at Leicester that the statutes of the realm forgot to print, identified in a 1977 article in the Law Quarterly Review. The administrative state had written the lockdown. The administrative state had then quietly let the document disappear. Of all the things English royal bureaucracy has been good at over 600 years, forgetting Catherine de Valois is the thing it has been best at. She did not stay locked. Sometime between 1428 and 1432, Catherine entered a relationship with a man in her own household. His Welsh name was Owen ap Maredudd ap Tudor. His grandfather had served the last Welsh prince to revolt against the English crown. Owen himself had a job at court, possibly keeper of her wardrobe, possibly her sewer, the man who tasted her food. He owned no estate. The penalty in the statute, forfeiture of lands and possessions, meant nothing applied to him, because there were no lands or possessions to forfeit. Griffiths and Thomas have argued this is precisely why she chose him. Edmund Beaufort would have lost the Beaufort lands. Owen Tudor lost an empty pocket. She married him, privately. By May 1432, Parliament granted Owen the rights of an Englishman, by particular act, removing the disabilities imposed on Welshmen after the Glyndwr Revolt. Someone at court already knew he needed legal protection. She had at least 4 children with him: Edmund, Jasper, Edward, who would become a monk, a daughter who died in infancy. This is the part nobody wrote down. She left no letters, no journal, no documented private speech. The single text in her own voice that survives is her will, dictated 3 days before her death. In it, she names only Henry VI, She does not name Owen. She does not name Edmund. She does not name Jasper. The mother of 3 boys on her deathbed was still operating under the rules of a statute that pretended they did not exist. She died on the 3rd of January, 1437, at Bermondsey Abbey. She was 35. Her funeral effigy, a painted wooden figure dressed in her coronation robes, was carried into Westminster Abbey on the 10th of February. The wooden effigy is still on display. It is the oldest surviving royal funeral effigy in England. She was buried in the Old Lady Chapel at the eastern end of the abbey. She did not stay buried. 66 years later, her grandson, Henry VII, the son of Catherine's eldest Tudor boy Edmund, decided to demolish the Lady Chapel and build a grander one. The chapel he wanted to build in 1503 would house his own tomb. To build it, the bodies inside, including the body of his grandmother, had to be moved. Catherine's coffin was lifted. The lid came partly away. Her body was inside, dried, mummified, intact from the waist up. The hands were folded, the face was visible. Henry VII, looking at the face of the grandmother whose private marriage had given him his name and his crown, did not order the coffin closed. He had her placed beside Henry V's tomb, inside the railings of Henry's chantry. The lid was left as it was. He commissioned a new inscription that, for the first time, named Owen Tudor as her husband. The version of her that had been administratively forbidden was now Tudor royal canon, and there she stayed, above ground, for 275 years. The Tudor dynasty came and went around her. The line Catherine had biologically founded burned out in 1603 with no direct heir. The body in the open coffin survived the dynasty by another 175 years. On the 23rd of February, 1669, his 36th birthday, a naval administrator named Samuel Pepys went to Westminster Abbey to see the tombs. The vergers showed him the body of Queen Catherine. By particular favour, Pepys lifted what was left of her upper half into his hands, and he kissed her on the mouth. He wrote, that night, I had the upper part of her body in my hands, and I did kiss her mouth, reflecting upon it that I did kiss a queen, and that this was my birthday, 36 years old, that I did first kiss a queen. He is not horrified, he is not embarrassed, he is pleased. He notes it the way a man notes a good dinner. The horror is not in what Pepys did, it is in how unremarkable the documents found it. She had been crowned by particular treaty, married in secret by particular act. Now she was kissed, 232 years dead, by particular favour. While her body was on display in 1669, the consequence of her bloodline had already played out 2 centuries earlier. August 1453, Clarendon Palace, Wiltshire. Catherine's son, Henry VI, by then 31 years old, married to Margaret of Anjou, sat down to supper. He stood up an unfamiliar man. Henry stopped speaking. He stopped recognising people. He could not stand without help. He could not feed himself. He did not respond to questions. He did not respond to news. The stupor lasted 17 months. On the 13th of October, 1453, Margaret gave birth to their son. The baby was named Edward of Westminster, Prince of Wales. He was carried to his father's chamber. Henry was shown the child. According to the witnesses, he did not look at him. He did not speak to him. He did not appear to know he had a son. The kingdom had a king who could not rule, and an heir no one was allowed to name. Within 2 years, the country was at war with itself. The Wars of the Roses had begun. Modern historians have spent 400 years trying to identify Henry's illness. Catatonic schizophrenia, depressive psychosis, the long shadow of his maternal grandfather, the King of Glass. We will never know for certain, but the simplest reading is the one Griffiths and Johnson both circle back to. Catherine de Valois, daughter of a man who believed his body was made of glass, gave birth to a son who at the same age her father had been at his first attack, fell into a stupor he never fully returned from. The Treaty of Troyes had promised the marriage would unite the crowns. It did. It also united the medical files. Henry VI lost his throne, recovered it, lost it again, and was murdered in the Tower of London on the night of the 21st of May, 1471. His son Edward, the boy he had not recognised, had been killed at Tewkesbury 3 weeks earlier. The Lancastrian line that Catherine had carried to England in 1421 ended in those two deaths in the same month. Owen Tudor, her second husband, the Welshman with no estate, had been beheaded 10 years before either of them in the marketplace at Hereford after Mortimer's Cross. The chronicler wrote that he had not believed they would actually execute him until the executioner ripped the red collar from his doublet. He then said, in the spelling of the manuscript, that herde shall lie on the stocke that was wont to lie on Queen Catherine's lappe, a head that used to lie in Queen Catherine's lap, going on the block. But Catherine's secret marriage produced 2 more sons. Edmund Tudor died young, but not before fathering Henry, born 3 months after his father's death, raised in exile in Wales by his uncle Jasper. On the 22nd of August, 1485, Henry Tudor, Catherine's grandson, defeated Richard III at Bosworth. He married Elizabeth of York and ended the war. The dynasty he founded would burn the last French claim out of English politics, separate the English Church from Rome, defeat the Spanish Armada, and lay down the legal architecture of an empire, all of it built on a private marriage no parliament had approved, between a queen who left no letters and a man who owned no land. The Treaty of Troyes, the document for which he had been crossed across the Channel like a piece of furniture, failed inside 2 generations. Joan of Arc reopened the war while Henry VI was still in his cradle. By 1453, English France was 3 coastal towns and a fortress. The Lancastrian dynasty it was meant to consolidate ended on the night of her son's murder in 1471. What survived is the marriage no one was supposed to make, and the body no one bothered to bury. Her own voice, letters, journal, recorded speech, is silence. In 1778, 341 years after her death, the abbey closed her coffin and slid it into a vault under St. Nicholas's chapel, a vault belonging to the Villiers family. She was placed there for lack of anywhere else, and named on the slab for a family that was not hers. A century later, in 1878, Dean Stanley moved her again to a permanent altar tomb beneath the chantry of her first husband. The inscription gives her birth year as 1400. She was born in 1401. It gives her death year as 1438. She died in 1437. Of the 4 dates Westminster Abbey carved into the stone meant to remember her permanently, 2 are mistakes. 600 years of administrative attention, and English royal bureaucracy still cannot reliably get the year of her death. She was crowned by particular treaty, married in secret by particular act, forgotten by particular statute, kissed 2 centuries after her death by particular favour, reburied twice by particular order. The treaty meant to give France to England gave England the madness that destroyed the dynasty that signed it. The Tudors, who fixed the damage, owed everything to a marriage no one had been allowed to record. In her own voice, on the only document she ever wrote, she did not mention them. She heard the lance before any of them did. The records keep everything she ever signed, and nothing she ever said.